Residential sales comparison and income approaches. Help. Documents. Email instructor. CH1 valuation principles and procedures of the sales comparison approach. PG4 course completion. Notes print. Leave a comment. Course completion. To complete this course and receive a completion certificate and course credit, you must successfully complete the following. Read all course chapters and pass all end-of-chapter quizzes. Take and pass the course proctored final examination. The Appraiser Qualifications Board, AQB, of the Appraisal Foundation requires that you complete a proctored final examination for any distance learning qualifying education, i.e., pre-licensing or upgrade, course. You may choose a live proctor or an e-proctor, depending on your state requirements. Exceptions are Florida, Georgia, and Illinois. We recommend you confirm with your state's regulatory agency which form of proctor is required. Proctor qualifications. A proctor is an approved person who administers an exam and upholds the integrity of the exam-taking process. It is the student's responsibility to find their own proctor. Short of providing suggestions of types of people who could be asked, McKissop cannot provide any further assistance in finding a proctor. For guidelines on who is an eligible proctor, see below. Examples of people who could serve as a proctor would be librarians, teachers, police officers, community volunteers, religious leaders, or someone who works in the public service industry. Ineligible proctors would be family members, your supervisor, a coworker, or someone with whom you intend to be employed. The important thing to remember about a proctor is to choose someone who does not have a vested interest in whether you pass the exam. If audited, you would not want your proctor choice to stand between you and your career. There will be additional details at the end of this course on registering your proctor, instructions for scheduling your paper or e-proctor exam, and additional proctor responsibilities. You may view the full proctor policy document here, which includes links to all proctor FAQs. End of page. Chapter start. 0%. Residential sales comparison and income approaches. Help. Documents. Email instructor. CH1 valuation principles and procedures of the sales comparison approach. PG5 overview and learning objectives for chapter. Notes print. Leave a comment. Overview and learning objectives for chapter. In this chapter, we will investigate the economic principles that have pertinence in the sales comparison approach. In particular, we will study the principle of substitution and the principle of contribution. We will briefly address the procedures that are employed when performing a sales comparison approach. 5 steps in this approach will be illustrated. We will generally review the adjustment process and discuss when adjustments are necessary. Learning objectives for Chapter 1. Upon completion of the chapter, the participants will be able to summarize various economic principles, relate data requirements for the sales comparison approach, explain the applicability of the sales comparison approach, explain the sales comparison approach formula, relate the steps in the sales comparison approach. End of page. Chapter start. 0%. Residential sales comparison and income approaches. Help. Documents. Email instructor. CH1 valuation principles and procedures of the sales comparison approach. PG6 Chapter 1 valuation principles and procedures of the sales comparison approach, definition. Notes print. Leave a comment. Chapter 1 Valuation Principles and Procedures of the Sales Comparison Approach. Definition. The sales comparison approach is defined as the process of deriving a value indication for the subject property by comparing market information for similar properties with the property being appraised, identifying appropriate units of comparison, and making qualitative comparisons with or quantitative adjustments to the sale prices, or unit prices, as appropriate, of the comparable properties based on relevant, market-derived elements of comparison. The sales comparison approach may be used to value improved properties, vacant land, or land being considered as though vacant when an adequate supply of comparable sales is available. This definition and all others in the course, unless otherwise noted, are from the Dictionary of Real Estate Appraisal, 6th edition, published by the Appraisal Institute, Chicago, Illinois, 2015. The sales comparison approach is the most commonly used approach for appraising residential property. It originally was called the market approach, or the market data approach. Then, people realized that all three approaches rely on market data. For a brief time, this approach was referred to as the direct sales comparison approach, which was then shortened to simply sales comparison approach. End of page. Chapter start. 0%.
Sales comparison approach is based on a relatively simple concept. To find the valuable property, you look at similar properties nearby that have sold recently. Of course, no two houses or pieces of property are exactly the same, so you make adjustments for differences, adding or subtracting value to the sales price of the comparables to figure out what the subject should be worth. The sales comparison approach makes a lot of sense. It works the way people think. Buyers typically shop around before they make a purchase to be sure they're getting a fair deal. They look at comparables on the market to see what is available and current prices. The appraiser basically does the same thing in the sales comparison approach, only looking primarily at actual sales rather than asking prices, although current listings are often considered as well.
Residential sales comparison and income approaches. Help. Documents. Email instructor. CH1 Valuation Principles and Procedures of the Sales Comparison Approach. PG8 Data Requirements. Notes print. Leave a comment. Data requirements. The sale of one particular house might deviate from market trends because of special terms of sale, the buyer or seller's motivation, or numerous other reasons. But if you look at enough sales, you'll start to see patterns emerge. You can use these patterns to estimate value. It is true that one sale does not make a market. The more sales data you collect, the more supportable and defensible your appraisal will be. The traditional minimum number of comparable sales has been 3. All standard appraisal report forms have room for a minimum of 3 comparable sales. The less reliable and comparable your sales are, the more sales you will likely need to provide a degree of reliability in your value opinion. Sometimes, your subject property is just unusual, and it is hard to find valid comparisons. There is safety in numbers. In some cases, your client will dictate the number of comparable sales they require. To many clients, 3 is a minimum number, and if lots of good data is not available, they will request additional comparables. You may need to provide 4, 5, or 6 comparables, or even more. It's not difficult to do. Simply add another page, or 2 to your report. It is important to note that a SPAP does not establish a minimum number of comparable sales. 3 sales is the traditional minimum number, but that requirement does not originate in a SPAP. End of page. Chapter start. 1%.